Born into a sharecropping family, Jesse Owens found his footing after moving to Ohio and growing up to become the Buckeye Bullet. After shattering records in college, he secures his place on the Olympic team, where he will then shatter Nazi ideology at the 1936 Berlin Summer Games, setting a new gold standard for athletics. Despite his successes, he returns to America to face racial prejudice and discrimination, far more difficult to break than any world record. Raise the flag.
Light the cauldron.
We declare the Games Odyssey open. Welcome to the Games Odyssey podcast, your home for stories of glory from the Olympics and Paralympics. I'm Jonathan Jordan.
And I'm Sarah Patton. We both love the Olympic and Paralympic Games, and we love history. But most of all, we love Olympic and Paralympic history.
From the epic and inspirational moments we all love, to the more bizarre and controversial moments, we're fascinated by it all.
Which is why we are on a journey through all of the Olympic and Paralympic Games, from the ancient Olympics held at Olympia, all the way to now.
All right, kicking things off with, again, another parental warning like we've had to do for all of our 1936 episodes, that this episode will contain discussions about racial prejudice. And frankly, a lot of those discussions are not going to be quite as much about Nazi Germany in this episode, but bringing it home here to prejudice that occurred here in the United States of America. So just a fair warning to everyone out there that some of that can be triggering for some people. So, Sarah, we are talking about Jesse Owens today because can't talk about 1936 without Jesse Owens. So,
yeah. So like most of our athlete profiles, we actually don't have any really highlights for this episode. So we'll just get to the point here, starting with, what did you already know about Jesse Owens?
I mean, a fair amount, because as an Olympics fan, he is one of those names that you learn about really in childhood. Let's be honest. I think most of us probably heard about him when studying, Black History Month. And then just when I got into the Olympics and started looking into the history, there's just no way to, you can't avoid Jesse Owens' name. It's going to come up. So there were definitely parts of his story that revisiting it for this episode, I already knew, but then it was fun to learn some new and kind of surprising things that I didn't know. So I was kind of glad I got to approach this with a little bit more of an open mind and kind of look for those fun things that I didn't know about. But still, he's famous for a reason.
Right.
When did you first hear about Jesse Owens?
When did I first hear it? Gosh, that's a really good question. What's coming to my mind is I remember during Black History Month, which if you're listening to this and you don't live in the United States, February is Black History Month. And at least growing up in public school, I remember during Black History Month, we had like a wax museum that kids put on where we would just honor Black heroes in American history. And Jesse Owens was always on that list, along with another great track star, Wilma Rudolph, who we'll talk about in the future, I'm sure. But so I remember distinctly learning about him in like third or fourth grade and, learning the basics, the gold medalist. He was very influential when it came to racial discrimination in terms of speaking out against it. And not that things changed instantly because he won gold medals, to be clear, but we know that he was a huge influence on our culture. And then I know we've talked a few times about the movie Race. I feel like seeing that years and years ago as an adult helped me dive into more of his story that just we didn't learn in school, like being snubbed at the White House and things like that, which I think we'll talk about. But But yeah, I mean, there's a lot about him that I knew. We knew that he was living in Ohio, not born in Ohio, but
Yeah.
it was very much all about his accolades at the Olympics, and rightfully so. But no matter who you are, what he accomplished is a big deal. But yeah, there's a lot more to his story than I think gets told a lot of times. So I'm glad that we're doing a profile on him.
Yeah, I mean, there were definitely some kind of similarities and echoes to some degree with even Jim Thorpe's story, where everyone remembers the really shiny Olympic story, but then they maybe don't know all the details of what these individuals faced when they got home, and the fact
Right.
that success at the Olympics didn't always get to transfer over to their personal lives back home because of racial prejudice and other struggles that they faced. So there were definitely parts of his story that kind of made me think back to Jim Thorpe a little bit and the prejudice he faced as well
Yeah.
as a Native American man. So
Yeah. Just I was going to say, I think that's a really good point, that it's easy, especially, and I get that we can't go too deep during Black History Month and whatnot, but that's why this should also be something that is talked about more. But
absolutely.
But that being said, yeah, I think, we do have a tendency that we want to sugarcoat things and just talk about the greatness of him as an athlete, but we want to ignore, like you said, the stuff that these athletes endured when they came back home. And sometimes athletes still endure these really hard things when they come back home, and they shouldn't.
Sure.
So while we've made a lot of progress, I think it's really important to still look at it and dive into it. So
yeah, we can always be better.
Yes.
But yeah, so we're going to take a quick little break, and then we will get into Jesse Owens's background and a little bit about his family and kind of the start of his story. All right. Okay, so James Cleveland, as we know him, Jesse Owens, was born September 12th, 1913, in Oakville, Alabama, as the youngest of 10 children. So, just like you said, even though he's associated with the state of Ohio, he was not born there originally. And then his parents, Henry Owens and Mary Emma Fitzgerald, were sharecroppers. And for short, they called him JC. Not to be confused with Jay-Z, JC for James Cleveland. So honestly, Sarah, that was the first thing that surprised me. I don't think I realized that was his actual name, because I've always just heard him referred to as Jesse, right?
No, that was surprising to me as well. And even just having Cleveland as a middle name, I thought was really interesting.
Yeah, for sure. So then, when he was 9 years old, his parents decided to move the family from Alabama to Ohio, where they would have better opportunities. And this made his family part of the Great Migration, which was a period of time during the 1920s when over 1.5 million African Americans left the segregated South for more industrialized urban centers in the North. In fact, after they moved, his dad and older brother started working in a steel mill. So this is something that was, again, for the United States, very big in 20th century history, was this Great Migration period where you did have a lot of these Black families, especially from these sharecropper backgrounds, decide, hey, let's pack up, let's move somewhere else where we maybe can have some better opportunities and kind of get out of this cycle of poverty that they were stuck in, right? And I don't know which side of his family it was, and it may have even been both sides of his family given the time, but they were not that far away from the time of slavery, all things considered. I mean, his grandparents grew up in slavery, so you have to think of it in that context too, that you have to give his parents a lot of credit for saying, let's break this cycle. Let's do something that's better for our family. So the big question right now is, how did he come to be known as Jesse? Well, when his new teacher at his school asked him for his name so she could enter it into the roll book, He said JC, since that's what his parents called him, but because of his strong Southern accent, she thought he said Jesse. So I imagine it being something like, "Hey, son, what's your name?" JC. Something like that. And as someone from the South, I kind of feel that in my soul.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Absolutely. Before we lived in Dallas, I had a very thick accent, and the school kids basically beat me out of it, or beat it
Yeah.
out of me, I should say, by making fun of me.
Yeah.
So, yeah, this is going to be one of those trivia facts that I'm saving for future Olympic parties where I give out prizes for people knowing Olympic trivia,
Oh,
because I think
100%.
it's so fascinating. So, if you're one of my
Yeah.
friends and you're listening, take note.
Yeah. So from then on, he was known as Jesse instead of JC. I guess he just decided to embrace his new nickname and move on with life. So whenever he wasn't in school, young Jesse worked to help his family, doing jobs like grocery delivery, loading freight cars, which is not exactly what I was doing when I was a kid. But there you go, just a different time and a different upbringing. And he even worked in a shoe repair shop at one point. Speaking of school, though, one of Jesse's earliest supporters was the track coach at Fairmount Junior High School. His name was Charles Russell, and he recognized Jesse's potential in track. And because he knew that Jesse needed to work after school to help his family, this coach, Charles Russell, actually allowed Jesse to do his workouts before school instead, which I kind of like that. I love that he was accommodating of Jesse's family circumstances there. And then when Jesse was 15 years old, he met Minnie Ruth Solomon, who was 2 years younger than him. And they dated all throughout their school years. And then they had their first child together, Gloria, in 1932. Jesse and Minnie then got married on July 5th, 1935, and they had two more children together, Marlene and Beverly, and they remained married until his death in 1980. So, puppy love that turned into lifetime love. Gotta love that.
Yeah, big fans.
And then Jesse first gained national attention in athletics while he was attending East Technical High School in Cleveland when he went to the 1933 National High School Track Championship that was held in Chicago. There, he equaled the world record for the 100-yard dash at the time, 9.4 seconds. And for our metric friends out there, that's 91 meters. And then he also jumped 24 feet, 9.5 inches in the long jump. That's 7.56 meters. So, yeah, just to make sure we don't lose that moment, he was in high school and matched the world record for the 100-yard dash. That's ridiculous to me. On
Yeah.
so many levels. But
agreed.
yeah.
Completely impressive.
Yeah, for sure. But Sarah, I'm going to kind of hand it over to you now to continue the story.
Yeah, so let's talk about his college records. So after his father was able to secure a job in Columbus, Ohio, Jesse was able to start attending Ohio State University, where he would get his nickname of the Buckeye Bullet, which I love that nickname.
Yeah, it's pretty great.
Yeah. Despite his talent, he did not receive a scholarship, and he had to continue to work part-time to pay for school, on top of training and learning, of course. Yeah, that's rough.
And let's clarify for a second, because I did not put it in the notes here. The reason he didn't get a scholarship was simply because they didn't give scholarship to Black kids. That's really what it comes down to. I didn't put it in the notes, but I think it's important to state because it does, kind of set up some difficulty later on as well. But it had nothing to do with his talent. It's just they straight up just did not give scholarships to Black kids at the end of the day. Yeah. Anyway.
Yeah. So working part-time on top of training, that's something that if you know anything about collegiate athletics, like they don't do that. not now.
And he was already a dad at this point too. So,
Yes.
think about that as well. Like, he has a kid that he's having to help support as well, on top of trying to go to school and everything else. Anyway, I can't imagine the stress of that at that young of an age.
No, I mean, I thought I was busy in college, but
no, yeah.
I mean, I wasn't as talented as Jesse, but still.
Right.
So at Ohio State, his coach was Larry Snyder, who served as the university's track and field coach from 1932 to 1965. So he had a pretty lengthy career there. He had been selected for the U.S. team for Paris 1924, but was then injured in an airplane crash just a few weeks before ending his personal athletic career. He also ended up being an assistant field coach for Team USA during the 1952 Helsinki Games and the head coach for the 1960 Rome Games. With Snyder's assistance in improving his technique, Jesse ended up winning 8 NCAA championships, 4 of those in 1935 and the rest in 1936. It should be noted that even in Ohio, segregation was very much a real issue faced by Black people. Owens and other Black students had to live off campus, and whenever they traveled with the team, they had to either order carry-out food or eat at Blacks-only restaurants and stay at Blacks-only hotels.
Again, it doesn't matter where you are in the country at this point, you're having to face these kind of terrible laws. And something that as I was just telling you a few minutes ago, I was watching that documentary, Olympic Pride, American Prejudice, in preparation for this episode. And one of the things they pointed out in the documentary that I honestly had never thought about before was that one of the reasons that athletics was an integrated sport was because you can't touch in it. You get disqualified if you touch someone.
Yeah.
And I hadn't thought about, oh yeah, that's right. At this point we have Negro leagues and then, and then the white leagues. And I just hadn't even thought about the fact that, well, that's because baseball is, we don't necessarily think of it like this because in comparison to football, but baseball is still a contact sport. You have to tag other players to get them out. Basketball is a contact sport. Like, all these other popular sports require some level of touching between athletes, but you already get disqualified for that in track and field. So that's why, someone like Jesse was able to compete in it against white kids, where he wouldn't have had those same opportunities in another sport where it would have remained segregated. But I just hadn't even thought about that until watching the documentary.
Yeah, no, that's fascinating. And yeah, it's easy for us to remember like Jim Crow and the Deep South. And we know that was such an issue. And by that, I mean, racial discrimination, prejudice, horrible laws, people getting away with things that they shouldn't have gotten away with, talking about like white on Black crime and all that. And so a lot of times we think about it just being in the South. So yeah, it's an important reminder, even for me, historically speaking, to remember that, Ohio, like even up north, that this was a thing that was going on. So
yeah, I mean, things were uglier in the South and more dangerous in a lot of ways at this period of time, but still they're facing the difficulties of racial prejudice no matter where they go, unfortunately. But anyway, let's talk about the Big Ten meet.
Yeah, so pun intended, it was a pretty big meet.
Yes.
So the Big Ten meet, held in Ann Arbor, Michigan on May 25th, 1935, would in fact be one for the history books. First, Jesse equaled the world record for the 100-yard dash with a time of 9.4 seconds.
Yep.
Then he set a record in the long jump of 26 feet and 8.25 inches, which that's 8.13 meters. That record would last for 25 years. Yeah, that's a long time.
Yeah.
The record was finally broken by Ralph Boston of Team USA at the 1960 Rome Games, where Owens was actually in attendance to watch it happen. He also broke the record in the 220-yard sprint with a time of 20.3 seconds and broke the record for the 220-yard hurdles, becoming the first person to run it under 23 seconds with his time of 22.6 seconds.
Yeah.
This man is busy. He's doing a lot.
Yeah. And I'd forgotten that he did hurdles.
I did too.
You know, we talk about him so much as just, you know, in the 200 and the 100.
Yeah. And of course, like we think about the long jump, but right. Yeah, I'm with you though. I'm like, oh yeah, he did that too. He was very busy. But if that's not enough, get this. He did all of that within an hour. What have you done in the last hour?
Looked at Facebook, washed some bottles for my baby. Yeah, I didn't break, you know, 3 world records and match another one.
Yeah, no. Same. Made myself a cup of decaf coffee. So yeah, sometimes this is called the greatest 45 minutes ever in sport, which, you know, it was pretty classic. Pretty classic.
Pretty great 45 minutes, I'd say.
Like, I know we've had a lot of history unfold since then, but this still has to be like top 10. Come on.
Sure.
It's very impressive. When Owens was asked later on what the secret for his success was, his answer was, I let my feet spend as little time on the ground as possible. So, very simple recipe for success. Anyone can do it, just we're not that quick.
Yeah, I'll say maybe this is why I didn't win as many medals when I did track and field, because my feet were on the ground too much. So oh man, I love it. It's such a great quote though. It's just it's so simple.
Yeah, it's like I don't want my feet on the ground for a long time. What are you doing with your life? I don't know.
Yeah. So that gets us into, you know, he has this Big Ten meet that is a huge deal. Everyone covers it in the news. Everyone's talking about Jesse Owens. He's already getting famous before the Olympics even happened, because just no one's been able to do anything like this in college athletics before, frankly. So this gets us up to the time of the Olympic trials. That's coming up here in just a minute. And also to the same time period that the boycott was being discussed. So before we get to the trials, it should be noted that on December 4th, 1935, Walter Francis White, who was the secretary of the NAACP at the time, he wrote a letter that was intended to Owens to dissuade him from participating in the Berlin Olympics, suggesting attending the Nazi-hosted games would be wrong considering racism faced by athletes of color here at home in the U.S. Now, okay, I've seen different things in different sources. Some sources said he never did send this letter, and then some sources said he did send the letter. I don't know. It kind of seems like if he didn't send the letter, we wouldn't know about it. But anyway, I'm just throwing that out there that different sources said different things. So, you know, we did discuss a couple episodes ago, though, that once Avery Brundage had convinced the U.S. to attend the Berlin Games, all American boycott efforts died at that point. So even the one that the NAACP was supporting in solidarity with various Jewish leagues around the country, they kind of stopped talking about it at that point, because there was just no winning the argument then. Now, while Brundage had his own reasons for wanting to go to the games, obviously, and we're not going to reopen that conversation right now, I think we can agree that historically it was for the best that Owens participated, and he wanted to participate. He wanted to go to the games given the hard work that he had put into it, and that had been his goal. He wanted to go to the Olympics. But I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself, so first, let's go to New York City, July 11th, where Owens would participate in the Olympic trials, and he would secure his spot on Team USA by winning the 100 meters, the 200 meters, and the long jump. So, you know, we got some foreshadowing there, obviously, with the trials. And then I love this story, Sarah. This is something new that I found out in this research that I never
Uh-huh.
knew before.
Yeah.
At dinner the next day, Owens met famed baseball slugger Babe Ruth, who asked him if he was going to win at the Olympic Games. And in humility, Owens replied, "I will try." And Ruth's response back to him was, "Everybody tries. I succeed. Why? Because I know I'm going to hit a home run just about every time I swing the bat. I'm surprised when I don't because I know it. The pitchers, they know it too. Know, Jesse, that you will win." I love that story.
It's
Had you ever heard this before?
not before getting ready for this episode.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I think it's amazing.
Yeah, I love the encouragement athlete to athlete across sports of Babe Ruth just saying and okay, like he wasn't being literal here because you can look at Babe Ruth's batting average and know that obviously he didn't hit a home run every time but he's talking about mindset here. Like when I step up to the plate, I have the assumption I'm going to hit a home run. I exude that confidence. I believe that that's what's going to happen. So I love that he was encouraging, like, no, don't, there a little bit of Master Yoda in here. Like, no, there's no trying. Know that you're going to win and then just go do it. So I love it.
Yeah. And like, and I imagine like Jesse showing up at the stadium thinking like, yeah, I'm going to win. And they know it too. Like, I wonder if he coached himself a little bit on that. I mean,
yeah.
Or if it's stuck in his head. But like you said, I love the athlete to athlete encouragement. And it's Babe Steak Ruth. He's a big deal.
For sure. Yeah. I mean, this is even similar to what we tell our son with gymnastics. This is something we say every day with him headed into practice. One of his affirmations that I go over with him is I always tell him, visualize your routine. Like, see yourself doing it before you actually go do it. Because if you believe in your mind that you can do whatever new skill it is that you've been working on, then your body will follow.
Yeah.
So,
absolutely.
I mean, I love that this is how Babe Ruth encouraged Jesse before the Olympic Games. So yeah, on that note, we're going to take a little bit of a break and then we're going to come back and talk about the Olympic Games at Berlin, 1936.
Because
we haven't talked about that enough.
Yeah.
So.
Right.
Okay, so Team USA sailed to Berlin aboard the USS Manhattan, with Owens as one of 400 American athletes aboard. It should be noted, too, that the 18 black athletes that were on board the ship were not allowed in the movie theater that was aboard. Those who tried to sneak in would get chased out by a steward once they were noticed. So, you know, there's this weird mix happening there on the ship of, yes, Olympic camaraderie between athletes of various races, but then you still have these race, just racist rules in place aboard a ship that they're not allowed to go watch a movie.
Yeah.
It's just ridiculous.
Sounds ridiculous. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, there's just simply no logic to it because it's just mean spirited. But anyway, so that was happening. And then when you think about the context of Jesse Owens not being able to get scholarships because he was black, having to stay in blacks only hotels, only being able to eat in blacks only restaurants, all those things that we've already mentioned, this next part of the story probably caught him by surprise because they arrive in Germany to discover that he has a very vocal German fan base, mostly made up of young girls, all asking, "Where's Jesse? Where's Jesse?" So that obviously goes to show that word of his accomplishments had already made an impact in other countries as well and was winning people over. In fact, some of these German girls actually approached him with scissors so that they could snip off pieces of his clothing to keep for themselves.
So which bizarre.
So bizarre. And can you imagine getting off a boat and you're in another country where you don't speak the language, and suddenly like a whole group of like teenage and 20-year-old girls is running at you with scissors?
No, absolutely not.
So yeah. So anyway, this brings a whole new meaning to the phrase sharp dressed man. But
I see what you did there.
Yep, had to throw that in. So in the Olympic Village, Owens was even visited by a German businessman named Adi Dassler, who had started up a small shoe company, which would later change its name to Adidas. You might have heard of it. Dassler actually talked Owens into wearing his shoes, which many people consider this the first sports sponsorship for a black male athlete. But yeah, again, I encourage people to go watch that documentary, because these athletes talked about, they have all these recordings from these black athletes who attended the Berlin Olympics, and talking about how, yeah, we knew that the Nazis were racist, but we didn't get that feeling from the people in Germany. Like, we felt very welcomed, and we just didn't see that. So very interesting dichotomy happening there under the Nazi regime. But anyway, let's actually go to the Olympics now. So on August 3rd, Jesse won the 100-meter, which no huge surprise there. And he did that with a time of 10.3 seconds, with teammate Ralph Metcalfe taking silver, which we mentioned Ralph back in our 1932 episode about Los Angeles. And I think it's worth mentioning too that he ended up becoming a congressman, and he actually helped in the creation of Black History Month. So fun little fact that I'll throw in there.
Love that.
And then the next day, Jesse had the long jump, and we already spoke in our last episode about the friendly battle for gold between him and Les Long, and ultimately he won gold with a jump of 8.06 meters. And for the rest of his life, he talked about the golden friendship that he and Long forged after that competition. Then on August 5th, so at least now, Sarah, he's got a couple, he's got some rest time in between events. That's kind of nice compared to the Big Ten meet.
Yeah, definitely.
Anyway, so on August 5th, he then wins gold in the 200 meters with a time of 20.7 seconds. And silver went to Mac Robinson of the US, who we also mentioned in our last episode. So you can go back and learn a little bit more about him. Now, originally, these were all the finals that Owens had competed in, or planned to compete in, I should say. And it looked like he would end the games with 3 golds in his 3 events. But then a few days later, on August 9th, the athletics coaching staff decided to do a last-minute switch-up for the 4x100 meter relay final. They decided to replace the only 2 Jewish American athletes on the team, Marty Glickman and Sam Stoller, and replace them with Owens and Ralph Metcalfe. So here's where this gets difficult is, you've got these black athletes who face prejudice at home, and you also have now some Jewish American athletes facing prejudice, because some people have theorized that this replacement was done to appease the Nazi hosts. Others say that's a bit unlikely, because the Nazis also were incredibly racist against black people. So are you really appeasing them by replacing 2 Jewish athletes with black athletes? But regardless of that piece of it, let's just be honest here. It could just as well have simply been anti-Semitism on the American team being carried out by the American coaches. And Glickman even confronted the head coach about this, asking, is this being done because I'm Jewish? Yeah, he was not happy about it. So this is one of those things, Sarah, which I don't know if you remember this in the movie Race. There is a scene about this, but they definitely gloss over it. and it's made a lot more positive in in the movie than what it sounds like happened in real life. In the movie, it's presented as like, well, if someone has to race in our spot, I'm glad it's you two. And that's not exactly what was happening here. They were rightfully upset that they were being replaced, and, you know, race probably was a factor here. We don't know for sure, but it probably was. So, Owens initially protested this change. To his credit, we need to mention that he was not a fan of this idea. He did not want to take a medal opportunity away from a pair of his teammates, especially if it was racially motivated, given his own experiences with prejudice in the United States. But it's reported that in the end, assistant coach Dean Cromwell said to him, "You'll do as you're told." And that was kind of that. So this is something else they talk about in that documentary. And Metcalf's son even talks about how his dad really kind of struggled with the fact that his only gold from the Olympics came from this relay. And that for his whole life, he felt like there was an injustice done to his Jewish American teammates. And so, yeah, he just struggled with, the only reason I have an Olympic gold medal is because they used me to replace them at the last minute. So, and then we do need to also note something that I failed to include in both our 1932 episode and our 1936 episodes, which is something similar happening over in the women's relay. So, Team USA's first Black female Olympians were Louise Stokes and Tidy Pickett. And at the 1932 Los Angeles Games, they were supposed to be a part of the 4x100 relay for the women's events. And from what I know, from what I've been able to find out, they did participate in the preliminaries. But then when it came down to the final, they were replaced by white runners in Los Angeles. And because of the rules at the time, that meant that they did not get a gold medal, even though they had participated in the preliminaries. Now, here in 1936, Louise Stokes and Tidy Pickett were both back in Berlin on the team again. Now, Tidy Pickett had been injured, so she was out of the picture, but Louise Stokes was still participating, and she again was supposed to be on the 4x100 meter relay team. And then once again, just like in LA, she was replaced literally minutes before the final by a white runner, and she had to sit on the sidelines and watch the team run to a gold medal finish. So I apologize I didn't include this story in its rightful place, but since we are talking so much about the prejudice faced by Black athletes with Jesse Owens' story, I felt like it was fair to go ahead and make sure we included them in here, because they deserve to be remembered, since they're left out of the Olympic, records as gold medalists because they didn't get a gold medal since they were replaced. So want to make sure that their names are in here. Let's go back to the men's 4x100. So they run the race, and the team sets a new world record of 39.8 seconds. And this means that Jesse Owens leaves the Berlin Games with 4 gold medals, which is something that had not been done since Alvin Krenslin won his 4 gold medals at the 1900 Paris Games, which, we won't get into Paris 1900 all over again. And I don't want to take away from Alvin's accomplishment winning 4 golds there, but they were an unusual games, to say the least. So,
yeah.
Owens winning 4 gold medals with the Olympics as established as they were at this point in 1936 is just truly unprecedented in terms of track and field. So yeah, and we'll touch on that again in the legacy section, but that's kind of how he left the Olympic Games and then returned home, which Sarah, I'm going to turn it over to you for this part.
Yeah. Yeah. So, as we've kind of already alluded to, we know that upon his homecoming, he faced quite a few things in Prejudice. So,
Yeah.
Prejudice things. So, much has been made of Hitler's supposed snub of Owens at the games. And first off, if you do get snubbed by anyone, why not let it be Hitler?
Yeah. Do you really want to brag about meeting him? Like, is that
Yeah.
is that really that great of a thing? Anyway.
Yeah. But second off, it's just not true. While Hitler did not have a personal meeting with Owens, this could be said for most athletes because Hitler had been told by IOC President Henri Bayer-Latour to either greet all champions or none at all.
And
Instead,
he chose none at all.
Yeah.
Basically.
I mean, it's Hitler.
I mean, and we do know that he did have private meetings with a lot of the German athletes, and he did have private meetings with some of the ones that were his favorites he picked out. But he didn't do once the IOC told him, hey, either greet everyone or none at all in terms of public setting, he was just like, well, then fine, I just won't do it in public, like whatever.
Yeah. Instead, it's been reported that Hitler later did shake Owens' hand to congratulate him on his achievement of 4 golds and even sent him a commemorative photo of himself, of course.
Of course.
Which,
yes,
it's like nothing is surprising about Hitler.
No.
Owens spoke about this himself later on, saying, quote, Hitler didn't snub me. It was our president who snubbed me. The president didn't even send me a telegram.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I remember reading that quote before, and it's bad. And not bad because Jesse said it, but just the whole situation is bad.
Yeah, it's bad that it happened, period.
Yeah, so that's right. Despite their triumphs at the Olympic Games, representing the United States, the 18 Black members of Team USA were not invited to the White House to meet President Roosevelt. Not Cornelius Johnson, who won gold in high jump, not Ralph Metcalfe, not Mac Robinson, and not even Jesse Owens, who had become the rare Black athlete who had gained a white fan base. But still, let's not give Hitler too much credit. He absolutely hated how Owens had almost single-handedly dismantled his theories about Aryan superiority. And he went even so far after the games to express his opinion that Black should be prohibited from future games. So, the petty side of me loves this because
he's such a sore loser.
Despite the snub by the White House, Owens was given a gold stopwatch by the city of Cleveland and a ticker tape parade in New York City, where he met New York City Mayor Fiorello LaGuardia, and where an anonymous person handed him a paper bag that ended up having $10,000 in it. Which, that also shows what a different time it was, because if you're at a parade in New York City now being honored and someone hands you a paper bag, you're probably going to have a police officer inspect it first.
And the story, what's funny to me about this story, I didn't include it in the notes here, but apparently he didn't even look at it first. Apparently it was Minnie, his wife, who later looked at it and was like, there's a massive amount of cash in here. It's like, oh, well, I'm glad we didn't throw that away.
Seriously. Moral of the story, if someone hands you a brown paper bag, make sure it's not like a weapon or something, but then check it for cash.
Yeah, talk about the brown paper bag special.
Yeah. I mean, I would take even half of that. But after the parade, he went to the Waldorf Astoria to attend a reception in his honor. But guess what? He could not enter the front doors of the hotel because he was Black. He had to use the freight elevator instead. That's right. He had to use the freight elevator to go to the reception honoring him.
Yeah,
so
ridiculous.
And again, this is not the Deep South. This is New York City.
Right.
Because Owens was so famous, though, despite the fact that Roosevelt did not invite him to the White House, the Democratic Party still sought an endorsement from Owens for the 1936 election, but Owens declined, supporting the Republican candidate instead. Which, not to get too deep into politics here,
For
The
sure.
nerve.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I don't care which party it is,
Yeah.
but it's like you don't invite someone to the White House, but then when it's election time and it can help you out, you want an endorsement from them. Like, again, I don't care who you are. I
Yeah.
don't care if you're red, blue, purple, green, whatever. Like, it's just wrong. It's just ethically wrong. So
Yes.
anyway, so after the Olympics, Owens understandably wanted to capitalize on his new fame and his international appeal. So he did seek out endorsements, but this meant that he lost his amateur status. Even though he hadn't made any money as a professional yet, the AAU just went ahead and took it away from him. So, which is kind of nasty on their part, in my opinion. But think about it from his standpoint, especially. He was in a tough spot. Here he is. He wants to make money as an athlete because he's talented in it, but doing so means he can't compete anymore in AAU sanctioned events. So, I mean, it's a real catch-22 that he found himself in, obviously. So, as a result of that dilemma, he really did struggle to make a lucrative living despite his athletic accomplishments. So, and frankly, because of the lack of opportunities for Black individuals at the time, he worked jobs as a gas station attendant. He was a playground janitor. He managed a dry cleaning business. And nothing against those professions at all, obviously, but that's not what you would expect from someone who becomes world famous, has 4 Olympic gold medals, and a college education. That's just not what you would expect. But again, it's about opportunity here, plain and simple. Now, in 1942, his friend and fellow athlete, Willis Ward, invited Jesse to move to Detroit, where he ended up working for the Ford Motor Company as a personnel director for a few years. And then in 1946, he ended up helping found a new Black baseball league called the West Coast Negro Baseball League, where he was the vice president and the owner of the Portland Rosebuds. He actually traveled with the team and would sometimes entertain the crowd between innings by racing horses on the field, which is something we'll come back to here in a second. But unfortunately, the league did not catch on and it disbanded after only 2 months. So that job didn't last for very long, obviously. After that, though, he still tried to stay in the sports world. He became a sports promoter. He would race against amateurs for cash, which by the way, he'd give people a 20-yard head start in a 100-yard race, and then he'd still win. Now, Sarah, have you raced against Jesse Owens?
No.
No,
No.
you
And
haven't.
even if
You haven't.
even if he were alive today, I don't think you could pay me to race against Jesse Owens.
Well, you can race against him at the USOP Museum,
That
the
is
Olympic
true.
and Paralympic Museum in Colorado Springs. So I have raced against Jesse Owens.
That's true.
They have an interactive track and you
Mm-hmm.
can select various athletes from different sports. But of course, when I saw Owens on the list, I said to myself, I was like, well, I have to take the opportunity to race Jesse Owens. Now, I don't think I made it more than 20 yards, down the track before he had already disappeared from the screen.
Yeah, no,
but yeah,
I didn't do it, but my son did it, which, his
yeah.
little, at the time, 2-year-old legs really, really kept up.
Yeah, so I encourage everyone, like, if you have a chance to go to the U.S. Olympic and Paralympic Museum in Colorado Springs, it's a ton of fun. And yeah, you pick your athlete from the list and what sport, and you race against them. It's a lot of fun. So anyway, so he did this in real life though, and gave people a head start, and he'd still win. And then he also continued to race against racehorses for money. And, concerning that, he spoke up about that and said, look, People say that it was degrading for an Olympic champion to run against a horse. But what was I supposed to do? I had 4 gold medals, but you can't eat 4 gold medals. So, his take on it was, yeah, this, like, you may have your thoughts that this is degrading or it's making a mockery of it, but I'm it's a way for me to make money for my family at the end of the day.
He always has like the best simple quotes.
He does, yeah, and a positive outlook on it. Like,
Yeah.
I'm gonna do what I can with the talents that I have. So if people want to pay me money to race against a horse, I'll do it. And I didn't include this, but now that we're talking about it, I have to throw it in here. Another quote I found from him, he said that because sometimes he would win against the racehorse, and he said the key was he would try to position the horse closer to the starter's gun and start on the opposite side. And he would try to make sure that the racehorse picked was more flighty, because if it got scared by the starter's gun, then it would take a few seconds before it would actually start running. So he could he could get ahead of the horse before it would finally kind of shake off its fear from the start gun and get going, which I was like, that's really smart, actually. So I don't know that I would think of that. But
yeah, no, I wouldn't.
yeah. Despite his clout, despite how famous he was, despite his fan base, because of all of that, he became a symbol in the struggle for equality. Because, yeah, he had all this success, he had all this fame, but he simply did not have the same kind of opportunities for endorsements or for professional sports the way that white athletes did. And frankly, that was as a result of the kind of racial prejudice that was the reality for America's 12 million Black citizens at the time. And then in 1955, President Dwight D. Eisenhower enlisted Jesse as a goodwill ambassador and sent him to India, the Philippines, and Malaya to promote physical exercise. So he got to travel the world some more. And he continued to do these kind of goodwill tours through the 60s and the 70s. So I love the fact that even though he wasn't able to keep competing at that point, since he was getting older, he was still staying connected with athletics and still promoting the power of sport around the world.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I love that. And then in 1965, he was briefly hired by the Mets to be a running instructor for the team. But that didn't last very long either, because the very next year he ended up being prosecuted for tax evasion, and he had to file for bankruptcy, which, again, I don't think that was a malicious thing from what I read. It's just frankly the fact that he struggled to make money. And so he needed every dollar that he could to support his family. And so, yeah, he didn't pay taxes and was probably hoping he wouldn't get caught for that. But he did have to deal with that and file for bankruptcy. He did eventually get to do some product endorsement work later on for some brands like Quaker Oats, Sears, Johnson & Johnson. Really what he was able to leverage the most was being able to have a speaking career and travel the world, because everyone knew who Jesse Owens was. If he was in town, they wanted to hear him speak. So he did find some success in that part of his life as a speaker. Then, after retiring, he owned racehorses, though I'm not sure he kept racing them at that point. I think he just ended up having a real love and respect for racehorses after racing them so much. And once he had the money to justify it, was like, this is kind of cool. I want to have some of these horses around. So good for him. And then, as we mentioned previously, he attended the 1960 Summer Games in Rome. But also in 1972, he was invited to be a special guest for the Munich Games. So it was kind of like a little honorary thing for the German Olympic Committee because of his accomplishments in Berlin. They wanted to have him back there for Munich. And then in 1980, he tried to convince President Jimmy Carter to cancel the boycott of the 1980 Moscow Games, because obviously the 36 games almost got boycotted. In fact, we didn't really talk about this, but there was only a 2-vote difference with the boycott vote. So it was very, very close to happening. And again, he did not want the boycott. He wanted to go to the Olympics. So he kind of made that argument with President Carter about the opportunity for the athletes. But as we all know, that attempt was unsuccessful. So my question for you, Sarah, I know this is a big what if, but what if President Carter had listened to Jesse Owens?
Well, a lot would have happened.
Yeah.
If President Carter had listened to Jesse Owens, then when being at the Starbucks drive-thru about a year and a half ago, you're like, where are you going with this? And being decked out in Team USA gear, as is probably 75% of our wardrobes, a girl who was working at Starbucks probably would not have said, hey, were you an Olympian? Which I'm like, look at me, no. but I was like, no, just a big fan, blah, blah, blah. And it was actually my husband explaining to her, like, no, we're just big fans.
Yeah.
And she kind of hung her head low and said, my dad is considered an Olympian, but he won't talk about it because he was named to the 1980 team that didn't get to go.
Man,
I know, it crushed me.
Yeah.
And so I think about everyone like her, where she had so much pride for her dad because he made it to the Olympics and didn't get to go. And that was just like a very one-on-one story. And I know that there's tons of athletes that were affected, but anyway, that just popped in my head for some reason. But yeah, if President Carter had listened to Jesse Owens, then I think he would have made a better decision than the decision that was made. What do you think?
Well, yeah, I mean, I agree. Because again, like, I think we can all agree that Brundage's reasons for not boycotting were completely different. But, for Jesse Owens, for the 17 other Black athletes who went over to Berlin, it was a huge deal, not just for personal reasons, but because they, and again, I know I keep mentioning the documentary, but people should watch it because I found it really informative. But, they talked about how when they went over there, they knew that they were carrying the weight of Black pride with them. Right. That they were representing a community, not just themselves, which Olympians talk about all the time. Like when you go over there for the Olympic Games, it's not just about you. You're representing the entirety of the United States, and just the significance of that. And I think it was heavier for those Black athletes because they were representing their community and they were representing a country where they knew they were not seen as equals, and yet they still loved their country. Right? Like, what a complicated emotion that I cannot fathom at all. But yeah, so, I think it's one of those things that's like, if we, knowing what history shows us about how their accomplishments undermined at least part of Hitler's propaganda. I think it was a missed opportunity in 1980. Obviously the two aren't completely similar in terms of, USSR compared to Nazi Germany, but still missed opportunity for the athletes and for the US to say, you know what, sports is going to transcend other issues right now, and we're going to focus on the way it can unify us. That's what it's supposed to be about. So anyway, I'm preaching now, so I'm probably going to cut some of this out, but there we go.
No, but yes, and agreed and amen.
Yeah. All right, let's take another quick little break, and then we'll come back and wrap things up with Jesse's legacy and some of the things that we should remember about him and those other Black athletes. Okay, so let's wrap up our discussion on Jesse Owens and kind of talk about the end of his life and just kind of what we can remember about him now and be inspired by his story. So, Sarah, take it away. Tell us just kind of what happened at the end of his life.
Yeah. Well, unfortunately, Jesse had been a heavy smoker since he was 32 years old. And in December 1979, he was hospitalized with an aggressive and drug-resistant form of lung cancer.
So sad.
I know. And we know that was very common back then, too.
Yeah. So this is a reminder for any kids listening to this. Don't smoke.
Yes,
don't do it. Don't start.
No.
Anyway.
Yeah. Just a couple months after discussing the boycott with President Carter, Jesse Owens passed away on March 31st, 1980 in Tucson, Arizona, at the age of 66. He was then buried in Oakwoods Cemetery in Chicago, and President Jimmy Carter issued a statement to honor his memory, saying, "Perhaps no athlete better symbolized the human struggle against tyranny, poverty, and racial bigotry."
Yeah, which I'm glad that was recognized, that
by the president.
By the president, finally, acknowledging, hey, his, remember his story and what he constantly struggled against. And yet, he kept fighting. He was a competitor to the end. Beyond that, there's no doubt of the indelible mark Jesse Owens has left on both sports history and history. But here are a couple of highlights we want to mention. In 1976, he was awarded the Presidential Medal of Freedom by President Gerald Ford, which is the highest civilian honor here in the United States. And then in 1983, he was inducted. So this is after his death, but posthumously, he was inducted into the U.S. Olympic Hall of Fame as part of the very first class of inductees, which deserved. And then his track and field record of 4 Olympic gold medals was not equaled until Carl Lewis in Los Angeles, 1984, who eventually we'll get there to good old Carl. We'll have to talk about him too.
Yeah.
And then to this day, I love this, but to this day, the Jesse Owens Award is given to the top track and field athletes in the United States every single year. So I love that they've named the very top athletic award after Jesse.
Yeah, I agree. And not that there's anything against certain courage awards or anything like that, but like you said, that it's given to the top of the top, to the best of the best, and that it's not the top Black athlete, but that it's all encompassing because he deserved that. To have that in his honor.
Yeah. Well, no, absolutely. And again, he's one of those athletes who I think was able to help open people's eyes to how ridiculous segregated sports actually was.
Yeah.
When you have in track and field, you have all of these just amazing Black athletes just, dominating. I think it really made people realize, well, wait a second, why aren't we using Black athletes in other sports? Why don't we have Black athletes in our professional basketball leagues? Why don't we have professional Black athletes in baseball, which again, Mac Robinson, his little brother Jackie, is going to be the first Black athlete to, be integrated into professional baseball. So yeah, I think, he was a big part of that conversation being possible. And yeah, they make this point in the documentary Olympic Pride, American Prejudice, that the accomplishments by Owens and the other 17 Black Olympic athletes for the 1936 games, they paved the way for integration across sports within the U.S., which is just absolutely incredible to think about, and also paved the way for the civil rights movement that would happen, later on. Because again, you've got these athletes who are representing their country and yet they don't have the same level of respect and opportunity that their white counterparts did. So
right.
that justifiably is going to make people angry and want the, equality that they deserve. So yeah, he was an important part of that story in so many ways. Anyway, that's Jesse Owens. So we're glad to talk about him. And obviously there's been a lot written about him. So if you want to dig into his life even more, one of my suggestions would be a very highly regarded biography by New York Times bestselling author Jeremy Schaap. And that book is called Triumph: The Untold Story of Jesse Owens and Hitler's Olympics. It's not the only book, but that's just one we would recommend. There's also, of course, the documentary film I've mentioned 12,000 times already, Olympic Pride, American Prejudice, which is available on Peacock and discusses the other 17 Black members of the 1936 U.S. Olympic team. And then we've also mentioned you can go watch the 2016 movie Race. It's decently accurate as far as movies go. Not 100%, but, that's movies for you. But yeah, there's a lot to dig into with his life, and we're just happy to get to share his story here. So if you enjoyed this episode,
and we really hope you did,
then come back next season, because this is the end of this season. We don't know exactly yet when we will be back, and I'll edit this out if need be, but do we need to mention what's happening in January at all? You can,
I don't care.
Well, I think you should mention it. It's not really my news. It's not my news, so you should talk about it.
I guess we never really officially said it on the podcast. But yeah, not that it's some super secret at this point, but sometime in January, I will be having our second son. So we will see how that goes. Yeah. And I say allegedly in January, but sometimes babies come early, sometimes they come late, but I think it's a pretty safe bet that mid to late January is going to happen.
Yeah. So anyway, all that to say, we're not quite sure when the next season will come back for that reason. And that's okay. That's a good reason to not know. But when we do come back, whenever that is, obviously we'll kind of pick things up after World War II for the 1948 Winter Games, which will happen in St. Moritz. And in the meantime, we'll do some replays in our feed to help prep for the next season. And I might be able to fit in a couple other bonuses. I'm batting around a couple of ideas that I might do in the meantime, so that we can welcome the newest Olympic fan into the world and give you some time to rest and recover from that. So anyway. So people can be on the lookout for maybe some fun bonus episodes that will be really poorly planned, but just something fun. And until then, Odyssey ya later. The Games Odyssey podcast is a production of Wardrobe Media, LLC. This episode was written, hosted, produced, and edited by Jonathan Jordan and co-hosted by Sarah Patton. Show notes, including research sources and transcripts, can be found on our website, gamesodyssey.com. Olympic is a trademark of the United States Olympic and Paralympic Committee, USOPC. Any use of Olympic in the Games Odyssey podcast is strictly for informational, commentary, and educational purposes. The Games Odyssey podcast is not an official podcast of the USOPC and is not sponsored, endorsed, or officially affiliated with the USOPC or the International Olympic Committee or International Paralympic Committee. The content of Games Odyssey podcast does not reflect the opinions, standards, views, or policies of the USOPC, and the USOPC in no way warrants that content featured in the Games Odyssey podcast is accurate.